What's up, everyone? Well, today I'm going to do some fall work on this large field-grown Japanese black pine. I use this as an example for a decandling video, I believe in the summer of 2021, and decandling doesn't differ that much by the size of the tree, but some of the other work that you do to pine trees really does. And so today, we're in middle development here, and let's just run through a couple of the things that I've been trying to accomplish with this tree. So as you can see, it has a big sacrifice branch up here, and as a field-grown piece of material, it has a really good amount of taper in it. So there's probably a 6-inch trunk here, tapering down to about a 2.5-inch, 3-inch trunk up here. But there's a giant cut point right here. And so this sacrifice branch is really meant to further the tapering process and to increase the size of this section of the trunk while helping to heal the large scar that's right here that I created, I think in 2019, when I cut off, a stub that the grower had created when they pulled it out of the ground, I assume. Now, it's kind of difficult to see because there's a lot of needles on here. I didn't actually candle cut it this year, the summer of 2022, so it was candle cut last summer. That gave it a lot more density, but this year I just sort of let things run, which is why the needles are relatively long. And as a result of that, I am going to actually be doing some pruning rather than decandling. So decandling is done in the summer. You can do pruning at decandling time, but I'm going to do some fall pruning here, basically removing some of the larger, longer branches in order to bring the tree back in, make the trunk look bigger, and just sort of get it further, one step further on its way to being a bonsai. I'm also going to actually take off this sacrifice branch because I want to have more distributed growth from this point forward and really encourage this thing to make all kinds of nice little buds all over the place everywhere that I cut it back. And with this gone, when I go to decandle this in the summer, next summer, summer of 2023, I will get a really strong reaction from the tree. And I'm not planning on doing any repotting right now. I did repot it since the other video that I did on this particular tree, and found that there was still a bunch of field soil in here. And in fact, don't think I removed all of it. I removed most of it, but it's good to go for another year or two in this large growing container that I have it in. Not all the design decisions have been made here, but a lot of them actually have been. So you can see that there's some scars here where stubs have been cut off, and then, there's other things going on. I think this was a dead branch that I just left a little stub on. And then some of these branches were much longer, and I cut them back in favor of small buds that were coming out near the base. Interestingly, this branch doesn't look super hot. It looks like it has some fungal infection, and I've been treating my pines for fungal infection, so I'm not 100% sure what's going on there. This actually usually is caused by, from a lab test that we did, it's a symptom of Pythium infections in the roots, which is kind of a difficult to get rid of fungal infection that can affect the root tips, and basically it's root rot. But in any case, it's funny because it will affect just like one branch like this, whereas the rest of the branches look okay. Although I've noticed this year that these needles are not quite as thick. Like, this was out in 14 hours of sun every day. It's not like it was getting too much shade or anything. The buds are really nice size, but the needles are a little bit wispy looking for the overall vigor of the tree, and it kind of gives me a little bit more pause. I think that the needles that were up at the top of the sacrifice branch were a little bit thicker than these guys are, and I'm not really sure how that works out, but in any case. All right, so I'm going to do some cutback, and the first thing I'm going to cut back is this branch. So on this branch here, there's actually a division right here at right near the trunk, only about 1 inch out from the trunk. I'm not sure whether the back portion of this ultimately is something that I'm going to keep. It's a little bit too big right here in order for me to be able to bend it down. And the same thing here, this is also a little bit too big, but I could kind of use this as a lever. I could also put a saw cut in, like do like a cut through the bottom half of this branch here and then bend it like a wedge cut together to change the angle here. I'm not going to do that today, but I am going to remove this portion of this branch. Okay, and then this branch was wired down a couple of years ago, but it's too long by quite a stretch. So I'm going to cut off this last section. So when you're doing branch building, you want taper and division in the branches. And so anytime you have like a long straight section that was grown that maybe you were able to wire but wasn't ideal, when you can cut back a section of it like that, that improves your branch taper and makes it less likely that you have sections with no budding like this one or like the one that I just cut off. So there's another part of this branch. I'm going to cut this one back a little bit as well just to bring that back in. I'm going to be wiring this here as well, and that means I'm gauging the length of each one of these branches relative to each other as I do this pruning to basically kind of just move things the next step. So as I bring this down and I bring these guys out, maybe bring this down a little bit, I can lay these out. But when I lay these out, essentially the branches are getting longer. So if I left the one that was out here, then I'd have a branch that was all the way out to here, and that's longer than what I want. And in fact, when I go to candle cut this next summer, there'll be additional cutback that I'm going to do that will really start to tighten up these lengths, because we don't want this much length between divisions. So there's like a couple of inches here, and we really want to have more divisions in close, maybe like more like 1 inch in between the branch divisions. Yes, even at the scale. All right, so going through now, this is the branch that's a little bit unhealthy looking. In my experience, these guys, they show this symptom, but this branch won't end up dying as a result of these symptoms. It'll actually grow through it, and if the fungus has been successfully treated, then next year's needles will come out and look perfectly normal. So it's not really a concern on that front. I'm covering the surface of the soil just so that all the needles that I'm dropping down from the tree, so that I don't have to go through and pick those out of the soil. And as I'm pulling last year's needles, I'm actually only pulling the needles that are going to be on the bottom, essentially. So as I look at it right now, the branches are going up like this. So I'm assuming that those branches are all going to be laid out like this. What I'm doing is I'm pulling those needles that are around the outside, essentially, while leaving the ones that are on the other side or that would end up here on the top. And that's because when I go to decandle back or cut back next summer, if I leave additional needles here, I have additional places where the tree can create budding. But I don't actually want budding on the bottom, so I'm not going to leave those needles. And it makes it easier to wire the tree if I remove them as well. If this tree were more mature and had more branching, particularly where the canopy was shading out stuff down here, then I would be looking at removing more needles up here than I am. And it's just, by the time I'm done with this today, it's actually not going to have a whole lot of branches, so I'm not too concerned about the density. So before I go much further, let's just take a look at the top here. So this is, so the large cut that I pointed out before is right back here, and this is all going to come forward towards us, and then this right there is going to be the actual top of the tree, or the rest of the beginnings of formation of the crown of the tree. So I want to take this sacrifice branch off just above that. All All right, so you can kind of see that cut here. There's a branch here coming out that I'll use to bend down towards the back. So let me grab my knob cutters. Now, sometimes I leave a stub when I'm doing this, but I'm actually not going to do that. I've been trending away from it lately because I find that the stubs that I leave, they just don't really end up looking like anything. I'm not sure whether I'm not carving them correctly but they're not convincing to me, put it that way. I was taught to do that, and I find it kind of interesting. I find it an interesting idea. The concept being that basically you're creating the illusion that there was a smaller branch than what it actually was that was cut off when you do that. But I think it actually just looks better to allow the tree to heal over and start creating bark rather than having a peg sticking out, essentially. So as I do this, I'm kind of gauging the distance to the base of these two branches. I don't want them to die on me. And that means that I'm going to leave just a little bit of space. All right, there you can kind of see the result of that. So back here, a lot of this growth is coming from down below, which is great as I can wire it out. But then there's kind of like a bare section on here, and then we have this branch junction. So there's this small branch and then this giant thing coming out from above it. And I keep looking at this and thinking to myself, like, well, if I've got this little one, do I really need any of this larger stuff on top? And the answer is probably no. But one of the things to keep in mind is that you don't always think of all of the things that maybe can happen. So I kind of want to cut that off, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. So I'm going to start next by just going ahead and putting some wire on here, which will allow me to make some more decisions about the branching. All right, with the bottom two branches, well, three, counting the one in the back, wired, you start to kind of get the idea of where we're headed here. So I'm going to continue just kind of laying things out. And I'm not doing anything really extreme here in terms of bending, because in some ways what I'm doing is it increases the quality of the branching, but it also enhances the pattern of back budding, and that's what I'm really after here. So it does both things at once, and bending these large branches down doesn't really have the same effect. So I can come back and do that once I have a little bit more taper and a little bit more of the structure done if I decided that I wanted to do it. This one's already been bent down, but it does appear that this guy probably should come down a little bit more, and ultimately I think this part will come off, but that'll depend. Okay, got a couple more branches wired here, and it's becoming more obvious in terms of a couple of the cuts that I need to make. So the first is this big piece is just sticking out way too far. If I lay this foliage out, it's out almost past the lower branches. So I need to kind of beat this back in, and I'm just going to go ahead and take off the whole thing because there's these coming off from that branch further back in. It's kind of an awkward structure right here because these two branches are coming out from either side of this cut, but this is also coming out just above this one. So it's not ideal, but I'm not going to take off all of this quite yet. I'm going to go ahead and wire this stuff out in order to make some more back branching here and then proceed on to here. But this is still too long because if I lay this out, it's going to start shading out this lower branch, which is actually a better branch. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this back even further just so that I can lay out this part and use those for branching coming from up here. One of the things that's important to do in order to set the structure in a kind of more straightforward and easy to maintain way is to rotate branch junctions like this. If you leave this with one on the bottom and one on the top, then you get a more awkward branch junction. Whereas if I just take my pliers and twist the major wire that's on here, I can have them leveled out more without really any damage to the branch, and that allows me to get a cleaner branch structure that's easier to maintain. All right, so here we are nearing the end. I've got those front branches here down, and I've got this branch that was in the back of the big cut that I made kind of spread out. So if I turn this to the side, you can see that there's kind of a big bald spot right here, and I don't have a good way of starting to cover that up. So what I need to think about is if I'm ultimately going to be building a crown and the crown needs to be kind of right here, where are the back branches that are going to fill in this area, the back of the crown essentially going to come from? So if I take out my trusty tape measure and measure from the rim of the pot up here, I hit 18 inches, and it's kind of right about here. So I've actually got a good couple of inches from this cut up to the top of where my foliage could be, and still have this tree fit into like a strict medium category in a juried show like the Pacific Bonsai Expo. So I'm going to bend this. I'm going to bend this down and back. The longest section here, I'm going to bend it that way so that it starts to create the longer branch that I want here, and that I have a more compact beginning to my crown that I can actually use these two little buds that are right here at the base of this shoot. I need to put just one or two more pieces of wire on there, and then I'm going to go ahead and twist this way, bringing all of this down, and then this guy can come out this way as well. What that's going to do right now is leave me with a kind of a bald looking sparse area up here, which is sort of inevitable at this stage of development, but it is going to set the foundation for kind of a good crown on this tree moving forward. All right, with the wire on, let's see what we can do in terms of bending. I'm going to bring this down now. One of the principles here is that we've got a short little bud right here and a longer bud underneath it. When you have a long bud and a short bud like this, I'm not actually even going to wire the short bud, but what I'm doing is I'm using the wire that I applied out here to rotate it, bring the long bud, which is stronger, down below it so that it's not shading out or inhibiting this bud, and then they'll balance out over the course of the next year. So with these guys, I'm going to kind of see what I can do to rotate this down. And when you're doing this kind of bending, you want to keep an eye on the bark in these kinds of areas. Watch for any splits that start to develop It looks like I need another piece of wire on there. So the reason I put another piece of wire on is not that the wire wasn't going to get it bent, but because I'm bending both this piece here and this piece down, it's causing the wire anchor point to separate from the trunk a little bit. So I wanted to stabilize that by putting another piece of wire on there that went actually down to this lower branch down here. Okay, so that makes the tree look a little bit ridiculous right now because it doesn't really have a top, but it sets the structure the way that it needs to be set in order for all of this growth to start dividing and creating a more usable and maintainable top. So I've got everything that I need here now in order to start building that top. So that the shortest buds right here in the middle will come up and divide and start to create the volume that I need right here. And it's only going to be right under my fingers, essentially, if I'm going to stay in my 18-inch category. All right, all done for now. Let's give this a quick spin so that you guys can see it from all angles. You know, at this stage, oops, didn't wire that, but I think it's fine. I could kind of bring it out, but at this stage, what I'm really trying to do is set structure. So I have primary branches in the lower parts of the tree, and I've I had already wired most of those once, but now I've got secondary branches going on a lot of those lower sections of the tree. And at the same time, what I've done is I've actually set primary branches up here. So these guys were already sort of a little bit set, but this top definitely was not. And a lot of these buds and a lot of these little branches, when the last time I wired this 2 years ago, didn't even really exist. So I've taken the new growth and harnessed it, positioned it in such a way that I have laid the foundation essentially for that crown that I was talking about, and that allows me to get this one big step closer to being a good pine bonsai. All right, well, I hope that was entertaining or helpful for you, and if you have experience working with this stage of black pine development or with big trunks and teeny little branches, leave some comments below. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.